Hi, I'm Mia Quinn, host of Sustainably Speaking. Thanks for being with us. On today's episode, I'm joined by my colleague Stu Harris, and we're going to learn about how using an economic lens can help us achieve a more sustainable ocean environment. Stu, thanks for coming back.
You're welcome, Mia. Always enjoy the opportunity to speak with you.
Joining us for this conversation is someone who has a really interesting perspective, Martin Koehring. He's the Global Director of Impact at Forum for the Future, and formerly he was head of the World Ocean Initiative at Economist Impact. Martin, thanks for being with us.
Hi, Mia, and hi, everyone. Glad to be with you.
How'd you become interested in oceans and sustainability?
I've always been interested in environmental and sustainability issues. But then when I started working at the Economist group, I was initially an economist. But then, when I got to know the Economist group better, I realized there are lots of exciting opportunities to really venture into areas that I'm also passionate about. And I actually got into sustainability through my interest in global health, because I covered global health for the Economist group for 5 years. I looked at things like heart health. I quickly got into food systems and the importance of food systems, not only for our health, also in general sustainability. I'm really interested in systems and how to tackle systemic issues. And the ocean, of course, is one of the biggest systems that we have, and it's 70% of the planet. I've always lived close to the coast. I've always been connected to the coast.
So you talked about, living near the coast, and I too grew up near the water, not the ocean, but the Chesapeake Bay. And so it holds a very special place in my heart. And so you often hear things like, we need to think globally and act locally. And you did talk about that systems-based approach through the economic lens and the bigger picture. But then with the food waste issues and some of the issues that you've worked on, certainly with oceans, how have you, in your work and in your experience, found a way to bring that think globally, act locally, mantra that we hear, certainly I used to hear as a kid, into practice?
Yeah, that's a great question, Stu. And there's often the issue that we have when we see a problem, and we see the systemic issues with something like the way we have used ocean resources, for example. And then we also need to take into account that there are communities that rely on these resources. And in fact, they have very sustainable ways of using those resources. We have often lost touch with those kind of sustainable local ways. One way we do this, and we have done this, the World Ocean Initiative, is connecting those headline findings with community projects. There are projects in countries like the UK and actually the US and Sweden that actually look at how do we work with communities to help restore these vital ecosystems, and that they actually can see economic benefit in doing that.
Just to follow up on that, the idea of approaching this from an economist's perspective, one of the challenges that we see often in the plastic arena is related to capturing the value of that used material. And in many parts of the world, the informal sector is responsible for that. So how is your experience working with local knowledge, with local information, capturing those ecosystem service benefits? How do you see that translating into capturing the economic benefits and other benefits from the informal sector or other local knowledge?
Yeah, one way is of fixing the market around it and actually creating credits around it. And I know that this also exists for plastics now, with this idea of creating those kind of plastics credits in a way for the communities to sell on the services that they provide to create this circular economy in plastics. So if we make it more kind of economical by making it worthwhile for these communities to actually recycle, reuse those kind of materials, then we create this market, we create opportunity for the community to create jobs out of it, but also we reduce pollution and we make everyone kind of involved in it.
I think you've said plastic wouldn't be so prolific if it weren't a solution. Let's talk a little about that.
We talked about this before in terms of, for example, food waste. We just don't appreciate the fact that we have solutions such as, plastic materials that can actually help, store that food. And there's a reason why plastic is omnipresent. And if you look at it from an economic point of view, it is actually creating a lots of economic benefits. And when people just say, we need to remove plastic, the plastic is the evil. It's only the problem because we haven't really fixed the system. I mean, those plastic bags as we see in the ocean, those plastic bottles, they end up there because we haven't properly incentivized recycling, reuse. We haven't properly looked at design, for example. We haven't looked at the whole value chain of plastics and found ways to bring as much plastic back into the system as possible. And that has both policy elements to it, like, the extended producer responsibility, but it also has design solutions in it and recycling technologies. And these solutions all need to work together.
Let's touch on what you just said. I mean, some of those solutions, we'd agree, designing and, the policies, and then those recycling technologies. Which ones of those, or if any or all, are you kind of touching through your work?
At the mechanical and the biological solution, we looked at several categories of how these technologies can be assessed. First of all, applicabilities. How applicable is this particular technology to the different kind of types of plastics? Looking at the range of plastics that are processed, to what extent there is mixed waste streams involved, and so on. Then we looked at the quality of output. So we looked at things like, can it be upcycled? Can it be downcycled?
Okay, so I'm going to break this down just a little for our listeners. Mechanical, I think for most of our listeners, means recycling that they, shred it up and then made into something else. You said chemical recycling, which we call advanced recycling. I know in Europe it's referred to way more as chemical. And that's breaking down these plastics back to their building blocks without burning so that you can make new plastics and new products out of it. Now, the third category you talked about, biological. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? And it sounds like you said it's emerging, which makes sense, but tell me more about what that means.
So, for example, enzymatic hydrolysis. So this is really about enzyme that is found in rubbish-dwelling bacteria. Often they live on kind of a diet of plastic bottles. It's then combined with another enzyme to speed up the breakdown of plastic into its building blocks.
Mia, if I could jump back in, can you talk a little bit about your role, the role of the economist, in helping to draw government and industry together to find those solutions, to find those ways where industry and government can work together in a way that we are creating markets and toward that objective of getting material back into the system?
This is absolutely vital to have a forum where we can all come together as business, as economists, as journalists, as policymakers. And often this has happened through our research we've done at Economist Impact. And one example is plastic study, actually, and also the Food Sustainability Index, where we have gathered experts around the table that that come from all these different backgrounds. So a leading policymaker, for example, with businesses in that space, with academics that have written about it, with civil society organizations that are often putting a lot of pressure on both business and policymakers to make that progress. And then an entity like the Economist Group that really can bring all these players together and to be a neutral intermediary between those different sources. So that's through those advisory boards, through those research processes, but it's also through those events at a very high level, because you mentioned, Stu, that it's even going one level up to create that trust. And you need to create that trust, to first be able to really sit at a table and talk openly about solutions.
How is the work that you're doing now different than we often see, or than other actors in the space, where you are bringing together not just business and government, but you're also bringing other stakeholders in as well?
That's right. So, I mean, what is often lacking is creating that trust. And how do you create trust between business, civil society, government? You do it by actually working together and trying to solve those bigger systemic problems.
I guess the follow-up question that I have is, all this experience that you have really focused around food systems, how do you see that being translated over into the plastics space in terms of addressing this issue of plastic in the environment, rewarding that creativity, finding those common goals related to the SDGs? How does your experience, how do you envision your experience translating over to help solve this great environmental challenge?
Yeah, that's a great question, Stu. And I think actually with plastic, this has already in a way started. It started with some of those more micro challenges. And, once we tackle those micro challenges, we can then build a more sustainable system. So one thing that Forum for the Future has done is looking at microfibers and really looking at, how do we actually end having all these kind of, microfibers ending up in our water systems and so on. How can we build a system that makes sure that the manufacturing processes and the end use is more sustainable?
Martin, I really just want to thank you for taking the time with Mia and myself today. It's been incredibly enlightening and helpful. And I really appreciate how you've been able to take all your experience from the food systems, from ocean conservation, and really translate that over to this environmental challenge we have with plastic in the environment. And it does come back to all those experiences you've had with building trust, with developing collaborative solutions, with understanding the local perspective, bringing in that local knowledge. It's really been a wonderful opportunity to speak with you today.
Thanks so much, Stu, and Mia as well for the opportunity. And I think it's exactly these kind of opportunities that highlight that we all need to work together. There is this shift that we need from awareness, because we're all aware of some of those problems: pollution, biodiversity loss, climate change, but it's actually moving to action. And the way we do it is actually through that collaborative approach that you just mentioned.
Martin, Stu, thank you so much for being with me. And to our listeners, we hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please let us know what you'd like to hear us talk about on the show and leave us a rating and a review. I look forward to sustainably speaking with you soon.